First, I'd like to apologize on behalf of one of our panelists. Paul Rendek could not make it today. Hopefully he's okay. I'm going to be giving the technical part of the presentation on his behalf. Hope I manage. He's a lot better than I am at it, so you'll have to excuse us for this. We have a good group of panelists here. Taylor is with the OECD, and gentleman is replacing Naeem. Forgot your name, sorry. Nasser, yeah. It's a pleasure to have you here from Microsoft. This session is actually about economic growth and the internet. There's different aspects of the internet that you got to think about and consider when looking at economic growth and how internet can drive economic growth. There's the model of the internet. It's been, over the last years of development, it's always been an open model where it's developed through consensus, and policies have been a bottom-up approach. The various participants, the various stakeholders of the internet meet on a very regular basis, discuss policies and discuss policy development, and based on consensus, those policies get developed. Some of you may recall how, many years ago, dial-up and 64K was actually considered quite fast. Some of you may recall that internet at some point, and I know this is Qatar, so it's difficult to say this, but internet at some point was, in Qatar, totally censored because 90% of the content of the internet was porn. This has, over the years, substantially changed. The internet's no longer for porn. The internet is a key economic tool and a key economic platform for growth. Today, a country that says, I don't want to be on the internet, is a country that's saying, I want to shoot myself in the head. So our panelists are going to discuss various aspects of the internet, and I'm going to start by asking Taylor a question about his experience on economic growth, that the penetration, the higher penetration of internet's led to, and how that may be GDP question, I think. How that impacts GDP? Feel free to share with us. Yeah, by all means. No, until the presentations.
Yeah, so it's a good question. There's been a lot of interest in closer. It's a good question. There's been a lot of interest in trying to measure what is the impact of the internet on GDP. So there's quite a few studies out there that show that the more broadband that you have, or the more internet connectivity that you have, actually the higher growth you'll have in terms of GDP. There's a lot of studies that do it. We're trying to pin down the exact numbers.
Good. So we'll hear the presentation in a bit and all the aspects of it. And I think as a private company, Microsoft, I think you guys benefit substantially from the internet, and you're staking a lot of your future strategy on internet and internet growth. Is that correct?
Yeah, Microsoft has been a major player in the internet for the last 15 years, and our growth strategy is a lot based on, of course, on using and delivering service over the internet. So that's true, and of course. We believe that the next generation innovations are yet to come. The next generation innovators are yet to come. We don't know them yet, and we hope to see more Microsoft companies out there, growing and coming up in the next 10 to 20 years.
Me and him will argue about that later on because I'm not a big supporter of Microsoft, but we'll discuss that later on. Anyway, so I'm going to invite our first panelist to come up and give his presentation, and. After his presentation, I'll invite the second panelist. Then I'm going to take over and discuss a little of the technical parts that Paul was supposed to handle. And then we're going to have a Q&A session and a little bit of a discussion about how internet can impact your economies and grow your economies, and whether an open internet is a proper strategy to pursue, or whether maybe the world is wrong and, maybe a different model is due. So, first panelist, Mr. Taylor, please.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm actually very happy today because I finally get to visit your beautiful country here in Qatar. I've actually been through several times, but I've never been able to leave the airport until last night. So I was very happy driving in, and it's a wonderful, beautiful place that's much warmer than France at the moment. So I'd like to start today. I have some slides that I'd like to put up that talk about what's going on with the internet and some of the recent research that we've been doing on the internet and economic growth. So if you spend any time in OECD countries recently, there's one word that keeps coming up on policymakers' lips, and that is crisis. Most OECD countries are in some form of crisis, or they're trying to avert the next crisis. So they've been very interested in technologies and things they can do to help bring them out of the crisis. What's interesting, though, is when you look at the sector I work in, which is the information economy, you'll see that actually there is no real crisis going on in our particular sector. We see growth in terms of revenues, we see growth, continued growth in terms of employment, and we see continued growth in terms of R&D spending. So why is this the case? Why is it when all these other sectors of the economy are doing poorly, the ICT sector and the internet are doing extremely well? Well, I want to talk about two just quick issues. Number one is anytime that firms are in crisis, they look for ways to save money and become more efficient. So what they're doing is they're implementing internet technologies and ICTs in general as a way to become more productive and do more with less. The second is we've moved from a situation where our goal was to get one computer on every desk to now a situation where our goal is to have one computer in every pocket in terms of mobile phones. We've seen tremendous growth in mobile connectivity that's jumped off the charts. And what that is it's driving a lot of the innovation that's going on right now in terms of creation for the internet. So we need to convince policymakers, and one of the things that I do in my job is we speak with governments and try and tell them how important the internet actually is. In order to do this, policymakers need numbers. They need something tangible that they can look at. So we did a study. We started a year ago. We brought together 50 leading experts from around the world to work on a methodology for measuring the internet economy. And what we did is we brought these people together, we came up with a methodology, and we used official statistics from the United States to come up with a number. And what we found was actually even surprising to us because of the magnitude. We found that up to 13% of U.S. business sector value added can be attributed to internet activities. So to put that in regular person language, that means that 13% of all value created by businesses in the United States can be tied back to internet-related activities. That's gigantic. That's the equivalent of 1.2 trillion US dollars or 4.2 Qatari riyal. So this is a huge amount of growth that's actually attributed to the internet. So the next question that we get asked is, okay, that's great. So how did this happen? And we tie this back to the open, innovative internet. And a lot of people say, well, but what does this mean? Why is it important that the internet remain open? You heard a lot of the speeches this morning that focused on the importance of an open internet. Well, why is it so important to have an open internet for innovation? So we've been struggling at the OECD trying to find a way to explain this to politicians, explain this to people in ministries that don't work with communications, and I think I found a good way to point out something that's quite similar. So let's look at the closed mobile system. So this is what we call in the OECD a feature phone. This one happens to be created by Nokia, and it's still sold today. And look at the applications that are available on this closed system. These are roughly the same applications you've had for the past 10 to 15 years on mobile phones. Dictionary, calculator, there's a clock, there's a phone book, calendar, notes, and there's an alarm clock. So these are the apps, essentially, that have been available on your mobile phone on this closed system for the past 10 years. What happened when a new system came out that allowed developers to build their own apps on an open system? Well, we have seen phenomenal growth with iOS and Android. So we have seen 740,000 different apps that you can now download on iOS for an Apple iPhone, or 700,000 that you can download on Android, on Google's operating system. Compare that with what we just showed of the applications that were available. That is the innovation that you're going to find on an open system where people can come in and develop. And it's the reason that keeping the internet open is so vital. What I want to talk about is because when we look across countries, we see that certain countries are more open in terms of the internet, some are more closed. But I want to tie this back to an economic principle called comparative advantage. And what comparative advantage says is that countries will specialize in a certain type of production, and then they'll sell that good to other countries that specialize in a different production, who then sell different things back. So, for example, the French specialize in cheese. So they create a lot of cheese that they sell to the world. The French don't do much in terms of some other good that's actually sent back to France. In terms of the internet and in terms of innovation, I would argue with policymakers that this is the growth area. The internet is the future economy. So you want to be a country with a comparative advantage in internet goods and digital goods. So it is important for you to have an open internet to create this ecosystem that will support innovation. At the OECD, one of the real hot topics that's also popping up in terms of policymaking is internet taxes. And the reason for this is, as I mentioned, we're in the period of a crisis, and countries are saying we need to raise revenues. So how do we go about raising revenues in a way that we can support the state yet still encourage innovation? And what I would say is, typically when we want to stop an activity, we tax it. If we want to reduce the number of people who smoke, we put an increased tax on cigarettes. If you want to decrease the number of people using the internet, you would put a tax on the internet. And I just want to show, from an economic perspective, what happens when countries consider putting taxes on internet connectivity of any sort, whether it be data coming in or connections by end users. What we'll see is that it depends on if you have elastic demand or inelastic demand, but ultimately it's the same thing. Prices will go up, usage will fall. Governments actually may see a decrease in revenue, and we've seen this in certain countries. The only way that they get an increase in revenue is if countries absolutely need to keep paying for the internet, and you will see innovation fall significantly. So this is really a way to kill innovation by taxing the internet. Governments should be doing just the opposite. They should be making it easier and cheaper for businesses and individuals to access the internet. Finally, it's not all about money. It's not just about how can we earn money off the internet, what's this doing for GDP. We need to consider the social aspects. And so we did a joint study with ISOC, the OECD, and UNESCO, where we looked at the relationship between local content development and the internet. So we identified 3 policy goals. We say that more internet connectivity is good, more local content is good, and lower prices are good. So those are the 3 things we were shooting for. We did an econometric study where we took in data that measured all of these things, and we wanted to look at the relationship. And what we found is that the level of internet development in a country is correlated with the amount of local content. So you can think that the better developed your internet connections are in a country, the more local content you're likely to have, and vice versa. If you have lower development in terms of internet connectivity, you're going to have local development, less local content that's available. And as you heard on the first panel, it's extremely important that we have more Arabic content. So it's important for us to have better infrastructure. We also looked, as part of this study, we looked at access prices. And what we found is that when prices are lower, connectivity is actually better, which is interesting when you think about it. Lower prices in a country for internet connectivity, whether that be international or domestic prices for internet connectivity, mean that you have a better internet network. So the goal is to reduce prices and increase the strength of the connectivity. So with that, I'll say thank you, shukran, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Okay, this is not, yeah, okay, it's working. Sorry, I'm going to move around. I hate podiums. I can't handle them very well. The next presentation is going to be from Microsoft, from Nasser. Thank you for this presentation on the economy, Taylor. I think it's very important to understand that the internet is not just a way for governments to make money through tax, if they're crazy enough to want to put it, but it's a way for their countries to have a competitive advantage over other countries. And competitive advantage today is what's about when considering what your nation is going to do and how it's going to perform versus other nations. Today, since we're in the lovely Qatar, it's, let's highlight that Qatar has a competitive advantage in the amount of natural gas it has. It's a very important resource that Qatar exports a lot of. But that competitive advantage is only a natural resource. It's not a competitive advantage that will translate to entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship spirit. That only comes from innovation, and innovation today is driven by the internet. So, next speaker, please.
Thank you for the opportunity. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Nasser Kettani, and I am the Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft in the Middle East and Africa. I want to start my remarks, when I just kind of reflect on the former session and my former presenter, my colleague on Taylor. When I look into how the technology has evolved in the last 20 years, and internet specifically. We keep as I hear what I've heard during the last session, we keep thinking that the internet, you go to the internet. Internet is something that you go to, you have a PC or you have a phone and you go to the internet to find something. The reality is, it's that paradigm is completely shifting. That paradigm is completely shifting because we are in a world where, every device, not only the PC, not only the phone, but our cars are connected to the internet. Our fridges are going to be connected to the internet. Our pacemakers are going to be connected to the internet. Any camera on the street is connected to the internet. So the reality is, internet is part of our lives. Everywhere we go. We don't see it anymore. It's not a place where we go to find something anymore. That's still a paradigm existing, but the reality, it is here as, when we go to our bank to do something, we don't feel like we're going to the internet, right? You feel you're going to your bank to do a transaction. When you will go to have a meeting with your doctor online because you can't travel, you're not going to the internet. You're meeting with your doctor. So these thinking is actually, and the interesting thing here is that the scenarios and the innovation that are, that we will find in the next 10, 15 years, we don't even think about that. The innovators are yet to come. And this is why it is fundamental that we have this open internet, to enable these innovators, to enable more content, and to enable more growth and jobs. So my remark today is really around, security and trust. So how do I move this? We all know that, and it has been talked about, ICT has a huge impact on economic growth, on all sort of things that I'm not going to cover here, business, education, health, we all agree to that. And in fact, even on country competitiveness, and I'm sure that our colleagues from OECD can give some interesting, comparison between, how countries compare to each other from a competitiveness perspective, looking into using, ICTs as a tool to do so. The reality is, as we look at that, there are, fundamental risks here that we all need to kind of realize. And this is what I wanted to kind of focus on today, because this is what I was asked to speak to, is the fact that, as we move into a world where we're all connected, everything is connected, etc., there are risks that we need to be, thinking about, and we need to, factor that into how we address the internet and how we address, technology. As, there is critical infrastructure in countries that more and more depends on ICT and internet. There is strategic industries in countries that also depend on the internet. And And I think that we have a responsibility to make sure that we are protecting those critical infrastructure, we are protecting those critical industries as we protect, our kids when they go to the internet. This is very fundamental, and the reason this is very fundamental is because, cybersecurity is taking all sort of new, forms, and I tend to be an optimistic. I tend to look into the good part of it. I fundamentally believe that cybersecurity and security, from a policy perspective, is a growth enabler, rather than looking at that from a defensive point of view. I think on one side we need to be when we look into countries and what they're doing from a cybersecurity perspective, they need to be safe. They need to protect themselves. But the most interesting thing is how they build an environment where there's trust, and we know that trust means growth, and economic growth. Trust means attracting investors to countries so they can invest with all confidence. Trust means consumers will go online and use the internet, etc. To their benefits and for innovators to keep innovating, etc. And this is absolutely fundamental, that as we build the future of internet, and as every country we look into the cybersecurity as a very fundamental element of how we do it in such a way that we enable growth. As I said, there are the typical threats. It's we moved from the typical malware and virus, the small activists and hackers who like to go to the internet and do stupid things, to now I would call it cybercrime, very well organized, etc. So we need to realize that, right? And we need to realize that and build in our policies in countries and building our strategies in countries what we need to do in order to protect ourselves from this, in order to enable growth. So that takes different things from our perspective. It takes awareness and education. It's absolutely important no matter what we do. It is important. I was actually just talking to my daughter yesterday, and she received an email from her friend. She thought it was from her friend. On her iPhone, she clicked on the link, and her Google account was hacked, and her Facebook account was hacked because she clicked on the stupid link that her friend thinks she sent her. So, and it created some panic, etc. So the reality is there are still people out there. They're trying to pick up our information, and we need to. So no matter what we do, education is cornerstone to what we do. Education, awareness, educating our kids about how to behave on the internet is absolutely key. That's number one. Number two is, of course, train our law enforcement authorities. This is fundamental. Our police and judges and prosecutors, etc. They don't understand what's going on. They need to be educated in how they address the problem. Of course, we need to have legal frameworks to protect, and of course, partnerships. This is not, and I can't, speak to that and keep just making sure that we really understand. This is not the problem of government that needs to address that. Cybersecurity is an issue of the same as the internet. It's an issue of everybody. It's an issue of private sector, ISPs, telcos, government, academia, and so forth, to work together to address the problem. It's not just government will take it and will address it. I don't think that will happen. So partnership is absolutely important as we address the problem. So finally, and that's my last slide. Now for us, as we look into cybersecurity, we recommend to the countries to look into cybersecurity as a national agenda, and build all the pieces that in that agenda to align to their priorities and policies. To conclude my remark, I would to go back to my first introduction, I think what we are doing now, as in this room and more generally as we speak to internet governance issues, etc., we are talking about building or making sure that we are providing the framework for internet growth for the next 20 years and 30 years for our kids, for our grandkids, for our future innovators. We're not talking about internet for us. For us, it's too late. It's here, and we're using that. We're talking about what we need to build into the future. And I think we have a responsibility here in this room and in the rest of, and the other forums is to keep that in mind. How do we build the internet that is going to enable growth, more jobs, more opportunities for kids to learn, and more opportunity for our innovators. We shouldn't leave that from our minds. That's the most important question that we need to address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's fairly important to realize that with any tool that exchanges money that leads to economic growth, there's going to be crime. And Nasser has kindly, spoken about the importance of security on the internet, and that's something that is really of concern that you should think about. I'm going to introduce myself at this point as I'm giving a presentation on behalf of a colleague, Fahad al-Shirawi, on behalf of the RIPE NCC, speaking instead of Paul Rendek on IPv6. I'm going to try and make this as untechnical as possible because I think your interest really is on economic impact of what's happening and business impact on what's happening. So brief background on what the internet is. Most of you probably already know that the internet is a collection of networks. And those networks are a collection of devices. And those devices are tools that people use, whether it's a pacemaker, a phone, microphone that's connected to internet to tell us when somebody's speaking in a session and broadcast automatically, a car that can park itself by using GPS signals and using motion sensors and distance sensors. All of these things, LoJack on a car connected to the internet via satellite. Your airplane that now has on-air internet services, that is all devices on the internet, and devices that may connect through those devices to the internet. They all need an address. Without the address, the data won't find its way. Now, 10 years ago, somebody sat down, and a very bored individual, by the way, really bored individual. I mean, who sits and does this? But they sat and said, listen, the IPv4 has this many characters. That's the maximum number of address space you're going to have. We're going to run out. So for the last 10 years, the technical community has been telling the world, we're going to run out, we're going to run out, we're going to run out. 10 years ago, it was a really big thing. The whole world was listening. And then, of course, it didn't run out. And all the business people got really bored with the technical people telling them they got to watch out. So they just stopped thinking about it. They moved on, thought about something else. The problem is, yeah, maybe they cried wolf too soon, but we've run out. There's no IPv4 left. I mean, okay, Africa, Afrinic has some, LACNIC has some left, APNIC has one more /8 left, but Europe and the Middle East, out. North America, I believe they're in the same position, and the rest are going to run out very soon. Why? Too many devices joining the internet. Too many devices joining the internet. This innovation of mobility, those iPhones and Android, and that has led to a big influx of devices and a big need for address space. And what this means is you as a business who may be a mobile operator or an ISP or even a software developer for the internet who wants your software out there have a problem. If the device that your software is on, if your mobile device, if your home laptop, your pad can't be reached because it no longer has address, what are you going to do? How are you going to add more users to your service, to your business? How are you going to grow your economy? You're out. There's no more address space unless you move to IPv6. So while I don't know what Paul was going to talk about, I think it's really important to understand that today V6 has become a must because the internet's a must. Can't do it on IPv4 anymore. And as more and more content providers migrate to v6, anyone still using IPv4 is having to use expensive equipment to reach IPv6 to translate the address space. It's going to get substantially slower with time. It's going to get a lot harder to use as more and more move. But you find yourself in a position to say, do I move today or do I move tomorrow? Maybe I have some more space left. I have my own space left for a year. Do I make the move now or do I make it later? What are the costs of making this move? The costs are big. They're not big in terms of your core network, but they're definitely going to be big in terms of your billing systems, because the software sadly has not caught up to what the hardware has now, capable of doing. So you have to make those investments, but and I think my colleague here can tell you what's happened to internet prices all around the world and margins on the internet services. And in some countries, the margins are as little as 3%. 3% net, 10% EBITDA. Very low margins. Very, very low margins. So who's going to pay for this? The user's not going to accept an increase in price. So who's going to pay for this investment? What happens? Why would somebody make the move? And I think since we're talking about the role of government in economy, the role of government is not to tax the internet. The role of government is to incentivize those ISPs to make the move quicker so that their national economy does not get impacted by a business decision that some guy who's looking for the next quarter results is going to make. So one of the simplest things the government can do is say, listen, we are a big customer. You want our business, you got to be v6 ready and compatible. If you don't have v6, we're not buying from you. That's a good business case to implement it, and once you've implemented it for one customer, you can roll it out for every customer. I think it's really important for governments to look at not how they can control the internet, but how they can help it grow. And I think it's really important for governments to consider that the more they try and control the internet, the more they'll break it, because it is a collection of networks. All you can control is operators in your country. All you can control is the part of the network that falls within your domain. And if you do it, you can bet somebody else is going to do it. So now somebody doesn't like you, they don't root to you, and your economy is dead. You don't want that. You really don't want that. Because once politics starts playing a role in routing of traffic, it starts killing the economy. And as much money as a country may have, if they don't have the content, they're dead. They're dead, they're out of the water. So, talking about the economic impact of V6, massive. Talking about the economic impact of government decisions, massive. Question is, where does each government play its part? What do they decide to do? When do they decide to do it? And how do they decide to do it? And I think I'm going to end with that on behalf of Paul and move to the Q&A session. And Professor White is going to start the Q&A session by fielding some questions from his students, and then we're going to have a general Q&A session with everybody asking their parts. Please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I hope there are some CMU students in the audience who are willing to step forward and ask a question of the panel. Do we? Sultan?
Sorry, anybody who wants to ask a question, cue to the microphone, and this way we know who's next, and it's easy for Professor White to pick the next question.
Is it practical for an AC student to start internet business on a low budget? Accepting payments for good over the internet requires an arrangement between the company, between the business and the bank, and this costs thousands of dollars. So is there a way to... You can't hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'll repeat the question for the speakers who missed this. He's asking about how a student can start an internet business and start accepting payments when there are some high costs associated with accepting payments online with some of the banks.
Yes.
And I think I'll start, and then I'll see what positions the other speakers will have
Thank
on
you.
it. Yes, and not every bank has high costs for dealing on the internet. It's very easy for somebody like you who's an entrepreneur who wants to run a business to consider maybe not banking in a country that makes it difficult, so that the banks in the country will start making it easier. I think it's private enterprise is driven by supply and demand. You demand, if the supply is not there, find a place with a supply. Those who missed on your business will soon realize how much money they're losing, and they will start delivering the service you require. Unless there's no volume, in which case things are going to be different. But look, with the internet, geography knows no bounds. Stop thinking, I'm in Qatar, I need a bank in Qatar. Or any country you're from. Stop thinking that. Start thinking, this is the internet. I'm not selling in Qatar. I'm not buying in Qatar. I'm selling to the world and I'm buying from the world. Start thinking big. This is what the internet does. It enables you to get out of the box that's drawn by geography. I mean, what's that line that's on a map? It means nothing to you. Any of my colleagues want to add something to that?
Well, I think Taylor mentioned the 700,000 applications on the app market. This is 700,000 companies and probably 2 million jobs around the world developing for the rest of the world, right? So you could be part of that, and they don't see the world as a small country or a big country. They see the world as 7 billion customers.
Buyers and sellers. That's what the world is.
At the OECD, we're currently doing an update of some work that we did 10 years ago on e-commerce. And some of the recommendations that we're looking into relate to what can governments do to make e-commerce more accessible to businesses in the country. So you're correct. This is an international, you have to think globally, but at the same time, we need to focus on what countries locally can do to make this easier, because if countries make it difficult to set up an account for e-commerce, then what they're doing is they're penalizing their own citizens for selling to the world.
That's actually a lovely addition. It reminds me of a point. Since I'm from this region, I don't think you're aware of this, but the majority of people, specifically students, I don't know about Qatar, I know about my country in Saudi, don't have credit cards. Why? Because they don't have a job. Well, I'm sorry, this is the time I need a credit card. I promise, give me a low limit. I won't spend more than I can afford, but give me a credit card. People are not taught responsibility early, and so the assumption is they can't be responsible. But without those tools, how are you going to be buying on the internet? Now, some banks thought, and if they found ways around it, did prepaid credit cards that allow students to get those, yes. And that's okay, that's a good start. But for a long time, even that was not available. So, you can even buy from Amazon. And that is a big thing, It is massive. Thank you for your question. Is there any more you want to ask?
No, that's all.
Hello. Yeah, this is a question for Nasser. Given the fact you're with Microsoft, you have a global view that some of us don't have. Could you tell us a bit about the different regional initiatives by the different governments in the Middle East about cyber law enforcement agencies, please?
Yeah, his question is that can you tell him what different governments in the Middle East are doing about cyber law enforcement, basically lawful intercept and cyber law enforcement, tracking hacktivists and all the things that they do to maybe catch digital crime and all these things?
There are all sort of things happening in the Arab world around how to to address the issue. I think there countries that are building their legal framework yet. I've seen a lot of countries don't even have a legal framework for cybersecurity. They haven't seen that, so they're going through that process. There also are countries who are building, emergency response teams and processes like certs. Countries that have already, some countries that are building those.
Can you name the countries? Can you give specific names of the countries?
Can I name specific countries?
For each of those.
Well, I think, I don't want to go into that, which country is doing what. I think that's not the point. The point is, are we making progress? For me, there are two things that we are not doing that are concerning for me. And that's a general statement across all the Arab countries. The first one is where many of the governments are not addressing that as as a global problem, you know, talking to industry, talking to users, communities, etc., to address that problem. They look at that from a pure government perspective, you know, looking into, you know, people, either it's Minister of Justice leading that with legal framework or intelligence driving that from an intelligence perspective. But they don't look into, you know, a holistic view of how to approach that problem. So that's number one. The number two issue I see is they're not looking at that as from a regional perspective. They think they can protect their country, you know, like the country has a border and they can put, you know, whatever weapons and they can protect. This is not the world where we are. And I think we need to look into harmonization of cybersecurity across, you know, countries. They need to talk to each other around the globe so they can address that problem. And I don't see that happening very much. So these are the two issues I think are big, instead of going into, you know, the details of who's doing what.
Thank you very much. I'm going to make an addition to that. I've actually attended several, there's a roundtable meeting around the world for government organizations that meet and discuss how they can work together on internet issues. And it's usually followed the next day by a law enforcement agency's roundtable meeting about how to work together and how to work with the industry to protect their countries. I'm sad to say, and not a single one of those meetings has an Arab country sent a delegation. Not a single meeting. Every single one I've attended had Europol, FBI, SOCA, Interpol, all those guys were there. Not a single time was an Arab country there. I think that what we do here is we try and solve the problem ourselves, and then when we fail, we pay a consultant to do it. And I think a better solution would be work with people on a collective, community type basis. Because you know the problems you're facing. I mean, don't think that other countries don't have the same problems, no matter how much larger or economically influential or how big their armies are. They're all facing the same issues you're facing. And instead of hiring them as consultants to teach you, trust me, they still have not figured it out yet. They have the same problems you have. So it costs you a lot less to attend those meetings and maybe work with those guys to develop a unified, holistic, global policy to deal with threats to nations and risks. And at the same time, it helps you not go overboard, because we tend to react to fear, and this is normal in all humans. When you fear something, you overreact in trying to protect yourself. And overreaction kills innovation. You need the right mix and match. Any more questions? I see Paul Rendek has come. You're on this panel, sir. I'm embarrassing him publicly. Professor White, should we open the floor for...
Are there any more student questions? It doesn't look like it, so I think...
Right, well, thank you very much for being a very attentive audience. It was our pleasure to be here and speak to you all. And if there's anything you require from any of the speakers, please catch us in the breaks. We'd happily answer any questions you may have on a one-to-one basis. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.